The desert heat pressed against Staff Sergeant Maria Santos as she adjusted her M24 sniper rifle on the rocky outcrop. Below in the valley, her SEAL teammates moved like shadows through the abandoned village of Karezi Sufla, Afghanistan. The intelligence had been solid. A high-value target was meeting with local Taliban commanders in the stone compound at the village center. Maria wiped the sweat from her brow, her green eyes scanning the terrain through her scope. 3 years of sniper training had taught her patience, but something felt different about this mission. The village was too quiet, too still. Even the dogs that usually roamed these rural settlements were nowhere to be seen. Through her earpiece, she heard Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison's voice, steady and controlled. "Overwatch, this is Alpha Team. We're approaching the target building. No movement detected so far." His team of 4 SEALs had been her brothers in arms for 18 months. Ever since she'd proven herself as one of the few female snipers. To pass the grueling selection process, Maria's finger rested lightly on the trigger guard as she swept her scope across the surrounding hills. The morning sun cast long shadows across the barren landscape, creating perfect hiding spots for enemy fighters. Her training kicked in automatically. Breathe, observe, calculate wind speed, check range markers. "Copy that, Alpha Team," she responded into her throat mic. "Overwatch has eyes on target building. All clear from my position." But even as she spoke the words, a chill ran down her spine. Her instincts, honed through dozens of combat operations, were screaming that something was wrong. The compound below consisted of 3 mud brick buildings surrounded by a low wall. Intel suggested their target, a Taliban bomb maker responsible for attacks on coalition forces, was hiding in the largest structure. The plan was simple. Alpha Team would breach and clear while Maria provided overwatch and precision fire support if needed. Through her scope, she watched Morrison's team stack up against the compound wall. Petty Officer First Class David Chen moved to the gate, his M4 carbine ready. Behind him, Petty Officers Rodriguez and Thompson prepared for entry. These men were elite warriors, each with multiple deployments and countless successful operations behind them. Maria shifted slightly, adjusting her position for optimal fields of fire. The M24 felt familiar in her hands, an extension of her will. She'd made shots at over 800 meters in training. But this mission had her positioned just 400 meters from the target, close enough to see facial expressions through her scope. "Overwatch. We're going in," Morrison's voice crackled through the radio. Maria watched as Chen planted breaching charges on the wooden gate. The explosion would announce their presence to anyone within miles. But speed and violence of action were their best protection now. The charges detonated with a sharp crack that echoed across the valley. Alpha Team flowed through the breach like water, their movements coordinated and deadly. Maria tracked their progress through her scope, ready to engage any threats that emerged from the buildings. But as the dust settled from the explosion, Maria caught movement in her peripheral vision. A glint of metal from a hilltop to the east, then another from the north. Her blood ran cold as she realized what she was seeing. "Alpha Team, abort, abort! You're walking into a trap!" she shouted into her mic, but it was too late. The first shots came from everywhere at once. Muzzle flashes erupted from concealed positions throughout the hills surrounding the village. The Taliban had turned the tables, using the compound as bait to lure the SEAL team into a carefully prepared kill zone. Maria's training took over as chaos erupted below. Through her scope, she could see Morrison and his team taking cover behind the compound walls as bullets sparked off stone and whined through the air. They were pinned down, surrounded, and heavily outnumbered. "Overwatch to base, we need immediate extraction. Alpha Team is trapped in a complex ambush." Maria called to their forward operating base, knowing help was at least 30 minutes away. 30 minutes that her teammates might not have. As she began identifying targets through her scope, Maria realized the full scope of their predicament. The enemy fighters weren't random Taliban. Their positions were too well coordinated, their fire too disciplined. This was a planned operation designed to capture or kill American Special Operations Forces. The woman who had grown up hunting deer in the forests of Montana was about to face the fight of her life. Maria's scope swept across the hillsides as she began counting enemy positions. 1, 2, 5, 12. The numbers kept climbing. Taliban fighters emerged from spider holes and concealed bunkers that had been invisible moments before. They had prepared this ambush for weeks, maybe months, waiting for exactly this kind of opportunity. Alpha Team, give me your status. Maria called into her radio while acquiring her first target, a machine gunner positioned on a rocky ledge 600 meters to the northeast. The fighter was raking the compound with sustained bursts from a PKM machine gun, keeping her teammates pinned behind crumbling walls. We're taking heavy fire from all sides. Morrison's voice came back strained. Rodriguez is hit in the shoulder, but he's still in the fight. We've got maybe 20 minutes of ammo at this rate. Maria's breathing slowed as she lined up her shot. The machine gunner was partially concealed behind rocks, presenting only his head and shoulders as a target. Wind was minimal, range 587 meters according to her laser rangefinder. She compensated for the slight upward angle and squeezed the trigger. The M24 bucked against her shoulder. Through her scope, she watched the Taliban machine gunner slump forward, his weapon falling silent. Machine gun position northeast is down, she reported, already scanning for her next target. But killing one fighter barely made a dent in their problems. Maria counted at least 40 muzzle flashes from the surrounding hills. The Taliban had committed significant resources to this ambush, more fighters than she'd ever faced in a single engagement. A rocket-propelled grenade streaked across the compound, exploding against the building where Alpha Team had taken cover. Debris showered down as the ancient walls shuddered from the impact. That came from the western ridge, Maria noted, swinging her rifle toward the new threat. Finding the RPG team took precious seconds. They were concealed in a natural cave opening, barely visible except for the brief moment when the rocket launcher extended beyond their cover. Maria waited, her crosshairs steady on the cave mouth, knowing they would likely fire again soon. Her patience was rewarded when a second RPG team member appeared, adjusting the launcher for another shot. Maria's bullet caught him center mass and she heard his screams echo across the valley. The RPG clattered down the rocky slope, useless now without its operator. Nice shot, Overwatch, came Morrison's voice. But we're still outnumbered about 10-1 here. Maria's mind raced through their options. The extraction helicopter was still 25 minutes out, assuming it could even land in this hostile environment. Alpha Team's ammunition was running low, and the Taliban showed no signs of breaking off their attack. If anything, more fighters seemed to be arriving, drawn by the sound of battle. Through her scope, she watched her teammates moving between defensive positions within the compound. Chen had taken up position behind a water well, his M4 chattering in short, controlled bursts. Thompson was treating Rodriguez's wound while simultaneously returning fire at targets to the south. A new sound cut through the chaos, the distinctive whistle of incoming mortar rounds. Maria's heart sank as she realized the Taliban had brought indirect fire weapons to the fight. "Incoming mortars!" she screamed into her radio. "Take cover!" The first rounds impacted just outside the compound walls, sending up geysers of dust and stone fragments. The Taliban forward observer was adjusting fire, walking the rounds closer to Alpha Team's position with each salvo. Maria frantically searched the hilltops for the mortar team. Indirect fire weapons were typically positioned in defilade, hidden from direct observation. But someone had to be spotting for them, calling in adjustments based on where the rounds were landing. There, movement on a ridge to the southwest. A Taliban fighter with binoculars and a radio, partially concealed behind a boulder. He was 750 meters away, at the extreme effective range of her M24, but Maria knew she had to try. This spotter was guiding rounds that could kill her entire team. She adjusted her scope for the extended range, factoring in the increased bullet drop and wind drift. The spotter was focused on the compound below, unaware that death was searching for him through a high-powered telescope. The shot was one of the most difficult of Maria's career. Maximum range, upward angle, and a target that kept ducking behind cover. She controlled her breathing, waiting for the perfect moment when the spotter raised his head to observe the next mortar impact. Her bullet flew true, crossing the 750 meters in just over a second. The Taliban spotter toppled backward, his radio and binoculars clattering down the rocky slope. Within moments, the mortar fire became erratic and ineffective, the gunners firing blind without their forward observer. But even as Maria neutralized critical threats, the situation continued to deteriorate. More Taliban fighters were moving into position, some getting dangerously close to the compound walls. Her teammates were running low on ammunition, and she could see the stress in their movements as they tried to cover multiple approaches simultaneously. The woman from Montana realized that her 4 teammates' lives now depended entirely on her ability to keep killing at a pace she had never imagined possible. Maria's ammunition count was becoming critical. Each shot from her M24 had to matter now. She carried only 40 rounds total and 17 were already expended. Every trigger pull needed to eliminate a significant threat or save her teammates' lives. Through her scope, she watched Taliban fighters advancing on the compound from 3 directions. They moved in small groups using natural cover and coordinated suppressive fire to get closer. These weren't untrained fighters. Their tactics showed military discipline and experience. "Alpha Team, you've got a squad moving up the eastern approach," Maria reported while tracking a group of 6 fighters bounding between rocks. "They're about 200 meters from your position." "We see them," Morrison replied. "But we're getting pressure from the north, too. Can you take some of the heat off?" Maria shifted her aim to the advancing eastern squad. The lead fighter was carrying an AK-47 and what appeared to be grenades on his tactical vest. At 450 meters, he was well within her effective range. She led him slightly as he moved between cover positions and squeezed the trigger. The fighter spun and dropped, his weapon skittering across the rocks. His squad mates immediately sought deeper cover. Their advance momentarily halted. But Maria knew it was only a temporary setback. They would find another route soon enough. A burst of automatic fire from the north drew her attention. 3 Taliban fighters had gotten within 150 meters of the compound and were laying down heavy suppressive fire, while 2 more attempted to flank around the western wall. If they succeeded, Alpha Team would be caught in a crossfire with nowhere to run. Maria swung her rifle toward the flanking team. They were moving fast, using a dry creek bed for concealment. She had maybe 10 seconds before they reached a position where they could throw grenades into the compound. Her first shot caught the lead flanker in the chest, dropping him into the creek bed. The second fighter dove for cover behind a large boulder, but part of his leg remained exposed. Maria's follow-up shot shattered his femur, taking him out of the fight with screams that echoed across the valley. "Flankers neutralized," she reported, already scanning for new threats, but the Taliban weren't giving her time to breathe. For every fighter she killed, it seemed like 2 more appeared to take his place. Rodriguez's voice came over the radio, tight with pain but still professional. "Overwatch, I count at least 30 fighters still active. We need that extract now." Maria glanced at her watch. 15 minutes until the helicopter arrived. Assuming it could even make it through the gauntlet of Taliban fire that now filled the valley, she made a quick decision that went against every rule of sniper employment. "Alpha Team, I'm repositioning to get better angles on the northern approach," she transmitted. "Continue your defensive fire." Abandoning her carefully prepared position was dangerous, but Maria could see that her current location left too many dead spaces where the Taliban could advance unobserved. She quickly broke down her rifle, slinging it across her back along with her remaining ammunition. The movement to a new position took 3 minutes that felt like hours. Taliban bullets whined overhead as fighters spotted her movement across the rocky terrain. Maria low-crawled the final 50 meters to a new vantage point that offered better coverage of the compound's vulnerable areas. Setting up her rifle again, she immediately saw the wisdom of her move. From this angle, she could see a large group of Taliban fighters massing behind a ridge, preparing for what looked like a coordinated assault on the compound. There were at least 20 of them, armed with assault rifles, RPGs, and what appeared to be a recoilless rifle. "Alpha Team, you've got a major assault forming up behind the northern ridge. At least 20 fighters with heavy weapons. They look like they're preparing to rush your position." Morrison's response was grim. "Copy that. We're down to our last few magazines. Whatever you're going to do, do it fast." Maria realized that conventional sniper tactics wouldn't work here. She couldn't pick off 20 fighters one by one before they overwhelmed her teammates. She needed to disrupt their assault before it began, and that meant taking risks that would make her instructors at sniper school cringe. Scanning the group through her scope, she identified their apparent leader, a bearded man in the center of the formation who was giving hand signals to the other fighters. He wore a distinctive white headband that marked him as probably a foreign fighter or senior commander. But more importantly, Maria noticed several fighters carrying ammunition boxes and what looked like mortar rounds. If she could hit those secondary explosions, might scatter the assault group and buy precious time. The leader was 680 meters away and partially concealed behind the ridge. Maria would have one shot before the entire group scattered and launched their attack. She controlled her breathing, factoring in wind speed, range, and the slight downward angle from her new position. The crosshairs settled on the commander's chest just as he raised his arm to signal the assault. Maria's finger smoothly pressed the trigger, sending another .308 Winchester round across the valley toward its target. Through her scope, she watched the Taliban commander stumble backward, clutching his shoulder. Not a clean kill, but enough to throw the assault group into confusion. Fighters scattered in multiple directions. Their coordinated attack dissolved into chaos. But Maria's position was now compromised. Muzzle flashes and the sound of her rifle had given away her new location, and she could see Taliban fighters beginning to move in her direction. She had maybe 5 minutes before they reached effective range with their assault rifles. The sniper, who had never missed a shot that mattered, was about to discover if her luck would hold when 91 Taliban fighters decided she was their primary target. The Taliban fighters had Maria's new position bracketed with automatic weapons fire. Bullets cracked overhead and sparked off the rocks around her as she pressed herself against the stone outcropping. Her gamble to reposition had bought Alpha Team precious minutes, but now she was taking the full attention of nearly 100 enemy fighters. "Overwatch, your position is being overrun." Morrison's voice carried genuine concern. "Get out of there!" But Maria knew she couldn't abandon her teammates now. Through brief glimpses between incoming rounds, she could see Taliban fighters closing on the compound from multiple directions. Her sacrifice would be meaningless if Alpha Team was overrun in the next few minutes. She rolled to a new firing position behind a boulder, quickly acquiring a target through her scope. A Taliban fighter armed with an RPG was setting up just 300 meters from the compound wall. At this range, a rocket-propelled grenade would devastate the small building where her teammates had taken shelter. Maria's shot took the RPG gunner in the head, his weapon tumbling down the rocky slope. But before she could duck back into cover, a burst of AK-47 fire chipped stone inches from her face, filling her eyes with dust and debris. Wiping her eyes clear, she spotted the shooter, a Taliban fighter who had gotten within 200 meters of her position. He was moving closer, firing short bursts to keep her pinned while he closed the distance. Behind him, she could see at least a dozen more fighters working their way up the hillside. The M24's bolt worked smoothly as she chambered another round. Through her scope, the advancing fighter filled her crosshairs. This shot was personal. He was trying to kill her, and Maria had no intention of dying in this Afghan valley. Her bullet caught him center mass, spinning him around before he collapsed behind a rock. But there was no time to savor the kill. More fighters were advancing from 3 different directions, and her ammunition was running critically low. 12 rounds left. Maria did the math quickly. She could see at least 50 active Taliban fighters, with more arriving constantly. Even if every shot was a kill, which was impossible given the range and conditions, she would run out of ammunition long before the threat was eliminated. The sound of rotors in the distance gave her a surge of hope. The extraction helicopter was finally approaching, though it would still have to run a gauntlet of Taliban fire to reach the compound. Maria keyed her radio while simultaneously engaging a fighter who had gotten dangerously close. Overwatch to extraction bird. The LZ is extremely hot. Multiple heavy weapons and at least 90 fighters in the surrounding hills. Even as she spoke, she watched tracer rounds reaching up toward the approaching helicopter. The pilot's voice came back steady and professional. "Copy that, Overwatch. We're going in regardless. Keep those fighters busy for 2 more minutes." 2 minutes might as well have been 2 hours. Maria could see Taliban fighters now within grenade range of both her position and the compound where Alpha Team was fighting. The carefully planned extraction was about to turn into a desperate running battle. A new sound cut through the chaos, the distinctive crack of a sniper rifle that wasn't hers. A Taliban fighter who had been advancing on her position suddenly dropped, a neat hole in his chest. Maria's confusion lasted only seconds before Morrison's voice explained. "Chen's got your back with his M4 marksman rifle. Keep shooting. We're almost out of here." Through her scope, Maria could see Chen had climbed to the roof of the compound building, exposing himself to enemy fire to provide support for her position. His accurate fire was dropping Taliban fighters at 400-meter range, buying her precious seconds between targets. But the numbers were still overwhelming. Maria counted her remaining ammunition. 8 rounds left. 8 chances to make a difference before she would be forced to draw her sidearm and fight the final battle with a pistol. The helicopter was now visible through the dust and smoke, a Black Hawk flying fast and low toward the compound. But Taliban fighters were converging on the landing zone from all directions, some getting close enough that the helicopter would be vulnerable the moment it touched down. Maria made a decision that would either save her team or get them all killed. Instead of continuing to engage individual targets, she would use her remaining ammunition to create a corridor of death that would allow the helicopter to land and her teammates to reach it. She identified the most critical threat, a group of 15 Taliban fighters who had reached the low wall surrounding the compound. They were preparing to rush Alpha Team's position the moment the helicopter landed and her teammates attempted to move. Taking careful aim at the group's leader, Maria squeezed the trigger. 7 rounds left. The leader fell, but his fighters immediately took cover and continued their advance. She needed to do something dramatic to break their momentum. Her scope found a fighter carrying what appeared to be ammunition for the group's machine gun. If she could hit those rounds, the secondary explosion might scatter the entire assault group. It was a desperate gamble, but desperate times called for impossible shots. Maria held her breath, compensated for wind and range, and sent her next round toward the ammunition carrier. The bullet struck the metal ammunition box, and the resulting explosion lit up the hillside like a 4th of July fireworks display. When the smoke cleared, the Taliban assault group was scattered and disorganized. Some were wounded, others had fled, and the rest were too stunned to continue their attack. Maria had bought the time they needed, but at a terrible cost. She was down to 6 rounds, and 91 Taliban fighters were still determined to kill her and her teammates. The Black Hawk helicopter descended through a storm of Taliban gunfire, its pilot showing incredible skill and courage as tracer rounds streaked past the aircraft. Maria watched through her scope as the crew chief returned fire with a mounted machine gun, his rounds walking across Taliban positions on the northern ridge. "Alpha Team, move to the LZ now," came the pilot's voice over the radio. "We can't stay on the ground long in this fire." Maria saw her teammates burst from cover, carrying Rodriguez between them as they ran toward the helicopter. Thompson and Chen laid down suppressive fire, while Morrison and the wounded Rodriguez moved toward the aircraft. They had maybe 200 meters of open ground to cover under intense enemy fire. A Taliban fighter popped up from a concealed position just 150 meters from the running SEALs. His AK-47 aimed directly at Morrison. Maria's rifle found him instantly. Range 520 meters, slight crosswind, moving target. Her bullet took him down before he could fire a shot. 5 rounds remaining. 2 more fighters appeared on the eastern ridge, one armed with an RPG launcher aimed at the helicopter. Maria's next shot shattered the RPG gunner's shoulder, sending his weapon tumbling into a ravine. The second fighter dove for cover, his nerve broken by seeing his partner fall. 4 rounds left. The helicopter touched down in a cloud of dust and debris, its rotors never stopping as the crew chief waved Alpha Team forward. But Taliban fighters were rushing the landing zone from 3 directions, determined to prevent the Americans from escaping. A group of 6 fighters had gotten within 100 meters of the helicopter, close enough to throw grenades or rake the aircraft with automatic fire. Maria's scope found their leader, a tall man with a distinctive red beard who was shouting orders to his fighters. Her bullet caught him in the chest, dropping him instantly. His followers hesitated for just a moment, long enough for Chen's marksman rifle to engage them from the compound roof. 2 more Taliban fighters fell before the remainder sought cover. 3 rounds remaining, and the situation was getting worse by the second. More Taliban fighters were emerging from concealed positions throughout the valley. Maria realized this ambush had been planned with multiple fallback positions and reserve forces. Even if Alpha Team reached the helicopter, the aircraft would have to run a gauntlet of fire during takeoff. Through her scope, she watched Morrison and Thompson bundle Rodriguez into the helicopter, while Chen provided covering fire from his rooftop position. The crew chief's machine gun chattered continuously, sweeping Taliban fighters from their covered positions around the landing zone. But then Maria saw the shot that could end everything. A Taliban sniper had positioned himself in a rocky outcropping 600 meters from the helicopter. She could see the distinctive flash of his scope lens as he aimed at the aircraft's cockpit. One accurate shot could bring down the Black Hawk and kill everyone aboard. Maria swung her rifle toward the enemy sniper, but he was partially concealed behind rocks with only his head and shoulders visible. At 600 meters, It would be one of the most difficult shots of her career, made harder by the fact that she was firing from an unstable position, while under intense enemy fire. The Taliban sniper's rifle was almost lined up on the helicopter pilot when Maria's crosshairs found their target. She controlled her breathing despite the chaos around her, compensated for range and wind, and squeezed the trigger with the smooth precision that had made her one of the military's elite shooters. Her bullet flew true across the 600 meters, striking the enemy sniper in the head and sending his rifle spinning down the rocky slope. The immediate threat to the helicopter was eliminated, but Maria was down to her final 2 rounds. "Chen, get to the bird," Morrison's voice carried clearly over the radio. Through her scope, Maria watched her teammates sprint across the open ground toward the helicopter, Taliban bullets kicking up dust around his feet. A fighter with an RPG emerged from cover just as Chen reached the halfway point of his run. The range was extreme for Maria's rifle, nearly 800 meters to the fighter's position, but she didn't hesitate. This was the shot that would save or doom her teammate. She aimed high to compensate for bullet drop, led the target slightly as he moved between rocks, and fired her second-to-last round. The bullet struck the RPG gunner in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his weapon clattering across the rocks. 1 round left. Chen dove through the helicopter's open door as the pilot began to lift off. The aircraft rose slowly, still taking fire from multiple positions as it gained altitude and airspeed. Maria felt a surge of relief as she watched her teammates escape the kill zone, but her own situation was desperate. Taliban fighters had identified her position and were closing from 3 directions. She could see at least 20 of them moving up the hillside, their faces twisted with rage at seeing the American helicopter escape. Maria's final round would have to count for everything. She could try to take out 1 more fighter before they overran her position, or she could save the bullet for herself rather than face capture and torture. Through her scope, she spotted a Taliban fighter carrying what appeared to be a radio, probably the commander coordinating the assault on her position. If she could eliminate him, it might buy her enough time to reach her backup extraction point, a secondary location she'd identified before the mission began. The range was 400 meters, the target was moving, and Maria was firing her absolute final shot with nearly 100 Taliban fighters closing in on her position. Everything that had happened before in her military career had led to this single moment. The woman from Montana who had learned to shoot hunting deer with her father took careful aim at her final target, knowing that this 1 bullet would determine whether she lived or died in the Afghan mountains. Maria's final shot echoed across the valley as her .308 Winchester round found its target. The Taliban commander with the radio pitched forward, his equipment scattering across the rocks. Instantly, the coordinated assault on her position began, to fragment as fighters lost communication with their leader. But Maria didn't wait to observe the results. The moment her rifle fired, she was moving. Years of training had taught her that a sniper's greatest weapon after marksmanship was mobility. She had perhaps 30 seconds before the Taliban fighters reached her previous position. Slinging her empty M24 across her back, Maria drew her sidearm, a Sig Sauer P226 with 3 magazines of ammunition. 45 rounds against nearly 100 fighters wasn't much, but it was all she had left. Her secondary extraction point was 800 meters away across broken terrain that offered minimal cover. The first Taliban fighters reached her abandoned sniper position, just as Maria dove behind a cluster of boulders 200 meters downslope. Their angry shouts echoed across the hillside when they found only empty brass casings and disturbed earth where the American sniper had been. Maria's earpiece crackled with Morrison's voice from the departing helicopter. "Overwatch, what's your status? We're tracking multiple fighters converging on your last known position." "I'm mobile and moving to secondary extract," Maria replied, staying low as she bounded between rock formations. "Tell base I need immediate air support at my location. I've got about 90 very angry Taliban fighters looking for payback." Through the dust kicked up by the helicopter's departure, Maria could see fighters spreading out to search for her. Some carried AK-47s, others had more sophisticated equipment including night vision devices and tactical radios. This wasn't just a random group of insurgents. They were organized, well-equipped, and highly motivated to capture or kill her. A burst of automatic fire chipped rocks near her head as a Taliban fighter spotted her movement. Maria rolled behind cover and returned fire with her pistol, her first shot dropping the fighter at 75 meters. The other fighters immediately went to ground, their advance temporarily halted. But Maria knew she couldn't fight a sustained battle with just a sidearm. Her only chance was to keep moving toward the secondary extraction point while using the terrain to break contact with her pursuers. The rocky hillside offered numerous hiding spots, but it also channeled her movement along predictable routes. As she low-crawled between boulder fields, Maria's radio came alive with the sound she'd been praying for. Overwatch, this is Falcon 1-2, two F-16s armed with 20mm cannon and precision munitions. We're 5 minutes out from your position. Falcon, Honda 2, I need danger close fire support, Maria replied while simultaneously engaging 2 Taliban fighters who had gotten within grenade range. Her pistol barked twice, both shots finding their marks. I'm surrounded by approximately 90 fighters in the hills around coordinates 41S MQ 123456. The lead F-16 pilot's voice carried the cool professionalism that Maria had learned to associate with Air Force fighter pilots. Copy that, Overwatch. We'll need you to mark your position with infrared strobe when we arrive. Danger close authorization confirmed. Maria reached into her tactical vest for the infrared strobe light that would identify her position to the incoming aircraft. But as she did, a Taliban fighter appeared just 20 meters away, his AK-47 aimed directly at her chest. Time slowed as Maria realized she wouldn't be able to draw and fire before he pulled his trigger. The fighter's weapon jammed. In the split second he spent trying to clear the malfunction, Maria's Sig Sauer came up and double-tapped him center mass. The man fell backward over a rocky ledge, his broken weapon clattering down the slope. But the brief firefight had revealed her position to other searchers. Maria could see at least 15 Taliban fighters moving toward her location from multiple directions. Her ammunition was running low, only 27 rounds left in her pistol magazines. The distant thunder of jet engines filled the air as the F-16s approached the valley. Through her tactical radio, Maria could hear the pilots coordinating their attack runs, identifying targets throughout the hills around her position. Overwatch, pop your strobe now, came the lead pilot's command. We're beginning our attack run. Maria activated the infrared strobe and pressed it against her tactical vest. From the pilot's perspective through their targeting systems, she would appear as a distinct friendly signature, surrounded by numerous enemy heat sources. The first F-16's 20mm cannon lit up the hillside like a deadly fireworks display. Lines of tracer fire walked across Taliban positions, the high-explosive rounds detonating among the rocks where fighters had taken cover. The sound was deafening. A continuous roar that seemed to shake the entire mountain. Taliban fighters scattered in all directions as the second F-16 began its attack run. Some tried to find deeper cover in caves and rock formations. Others attempted to flee down into the valley floor. A few kept advancing toward Maria's position, apparently determined to kill her even as their comrades were being destroyed around them. Maria engaged these determined fighters with her pistol, while the F-16s continued their devastating attack runs. Her shots were precise and deadly at close range. One fighter fell at 15 meters, another at 25 meters. But each engagement used precious ammunition she couldn't spare. As the fighter jets pulled off target after their second pass, an eerie quiet settled over the valley. The coordinated Taliban assault had been shattered by American air power, but Maria could still see scattered fighters moving among the rocks. The immediate threat was reduced but not eliminated. Her radio crackled with the voice of an incoming rescue helicopter. Overwatch, this is Rescue 23. We're inbound to your secondary extraction point. ETA 3 minutes. Can you make it to the LZ? Maria looked toward her planned extraction point, still 400 meters away across open ground. She could see several Taliban fighters positioned along the route, survivors of the F-16 attack who were now focused entirely on preventing her escape. Rescue 23, the route to secondary LZ is compromised, Maria replied while reloading her pistol with her final magazine. I count at least 6 fighters between my position and the extraction point. Copy that, Overwatch. We'll provide covering fire during your movement. Start moving when you hear our guns. The rescue helicopter appeared over the ridge like an avenging angel, its door gunners immediately engaging Taliban positions with mounted machine guns. The heavy .50 caliber rounds shattered rocks and sent fighters scrambling for deeper cover. Maria sprinted from her concealment, using the helicopter's covering fire to mask her movement across the open ground. Taliban bullets whined past her, head as she zigzagged between boulder fields. But the enemy fire was wild and uncoordinated under pressure from the aircraft above. Halfway to the extraction point, a Taliban fighter rose from behind a rock pile directly in her path. His AK-47 was aimed at her chest from just 30 meters away. Maria's Sig Sauer came up as she ran, her first shot catching him in the shoulder and spinning him around. Her second shot finished him as she sprinted past his falling body. 15 rounds left in her final magazine. The helicopter settled into a hover over the extraction point, its crew chief waving Maria forward, while his door gunners continued engaging targets throughout the surrounding hills. Maria could see the aircraft taking hits from Taliban small arms fire, sparks flying from its armored hull. A final Taliban fighter appeared between Maria and the helicopter, this one armed with an RPG launcher. At point-blank range, a rocket-propelled grenade could destroy the rescue aircraft and kill everyone aboard. Maria didn't hesitate. She emptied half her remaining ammunition into the fighter, her bullet striking him before he could shoulder his weapon. 7 rounds left, and she was still 50 meters from safety. Maria's legs burned as she covered the final distance to the helicopter. The crew chief reached down to pull her aboard just as the aircraft began to lift off. Taliban fighters emerged from concealment all around the extraction point, their muzzle flashes lighting up the darkening Afghan sky. As the helicopter gained altitude and speed, Maria collapsed onto the aircraft's floor, her ammunition exhausted and her mission complete. Through the open door, she could see the valley floor littered with Taliban casualties from her sniper fire and the F-16 attack runs. Overwatch, this is Alpha Team. Morrison's voice came over the helicopter's internal communication system. Outstanding work down there. How many did you get? Maria thought back through the long battle. The machine gunner, the mortar spotter, the RPG teams, the assault group leaders, the enemy sniper, and dozens of others. I stopped counting at 25 confirmed kills, she replied. The F-16s got most of the rest. The crew chief handed her a bottle of water and a medical kit for the minor cuts and scrapes she'd sustained during her escape. Ma'am, I've been flying combat rescues for 8 years, and I've never seen anything like what you just did. One sniper against 90-plus fighters. As the helicopter flew toward their forward operating base, Maria cleaned her rifle and began the mental process of writing her after-action report. The intelligence had been wrong. The Taliban had turned their trap into a counter-trap, using American Special Operations Forces as bait for a major ambush. But for Maria Santos, the real reward was much simpler. All of her teammates had made it home alive, and that was the only medal that truly mattered to the woman from Montana, who had learned that sometimes one shot really could change everything.